Millionaire met his ex-wife 3 months after divorce. When he noticed her baby belly, he regretted it. The soft hum of the air conditioning was the only sound in the penthouse as Ethan Montgomery sat at his desk, staring at the divorce papers. His hand rested on the Mont Blanc pen, the one Charlotte had gifted him when he secured his first major investment deal. Back then, it had been a symbol of love and faith in his ambitions. Now it felt heavy in his hand, its weight almost mocking him. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Manhattan skyline glittered with promise. The Empire State Building loomed in the distance, its lights piercing the night sky. Ethan's office, his fortress, was perched high above the bustling streets of New York City, a constant reminder of how far he had come. But tonight, the city felt hollow, much like his victories. "Ethan, you've got to let go," Charlotte said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled slightly, though she was determined to mask her pain. Ethan turned to look at her, his chest tightening. She stood near the doorway, her hand resting on the strap of the worn leather duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She had packed it hastily that morning, choosing only the essentials. Her caramel hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and her hazel eyes, once filled with warmth and laughter, were now clouded with sadness. "I don't want this, Charlotte," Ethan said, his voice low and strained. "We can fix it. I'll take some time off work. We'll go somewhere, Paris, Venice. We'll figure it out." Charlotte's lips curled into a sad smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ethan, it's not about trips or promises. It's about who we've become." She paused, looking around the penthouse at the polished surfaces and expensive art pieces that reflected his success. "This world of yours, it's suffocating me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "This world is what gave us everything. Do you know how many people would kill for a life like this?" "A life like this?" Charlotte echoed, her voice breaking. She gestured toward the marble countertop in the kitchen, the imported Italian furniture, and the grand Steinway piano that neither of them played. "It's a life of things, Ethan. But what about us? When was the last time we had dinner without your phone buzzing every 5 minutes? When was the last time you even looked at me, really looked at me?" Her words cut deeper than he expected. He had built this life for them, for her. He had worked late nights and weekends, taken risks, made sacrifices, all to ensure their future was secure. How could she not see that? "I thought this was what you wanted," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A life where you didn't have to struggle." Charlotte's shoulders slumped, her expression softening. "I wanted us, Ethan. I never cared about the penthouse or the parties or the recognition. I just wanted a partner, someone who saw me. But somewhere along the way, you stopped." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the faint sound of the city below. Finally, Charlotte shifted her bag higher on her shoulder and took a step toward the door. "Where will you go?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "I don't know yet," she admitted, glancing over her shoulder. "But wherever it is, it'll be someplace where I can breathe again." Ethan felt a pang of fear as he watched her walk away. He wanted to call out to her, to beg her to stay, but his pride held him back. Instead, he clenched the pen in his hand and signed his name at the bottom of the divorce papers. The door clicked shut, and the sound echoed through the empty penthouse. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the papers that had sealed the end of their marriage. His eyes wandered to the photo on his desk, a picture of him and Charlotte in Central Park, taken on a crisp autumn day. Her cheeks were flushed, her smile wide, and she looked at him like he was the only man in the world. That man, Ethan realized, no longer existed. He poured himself a glass of Macallan 18, the amber liquid catching the light as he swirled it in the crystal tumbler. He took a sip, the burn spreading through his chest, but it did little to dull the ache that had settled there. For the first time in his life, Ethan Montgomery, a man who thrived on control, felt utterly powerless. Outside, the city moved on without him. Yellow taxis honked, pedestrians hurried along the streets, and the lights of Times Square flickered endlessly. Life didn't pause for broken hearts, not even in New York. As Ethan drained the last of his whiskey, he made a silent vow. He would rebuild himself, stronger and more focused than ever. Work was the answer it always had been. Love was a distraction, a liability he couldn't afford. But deep down, as the night stretched on, a nagging voice whispered that he was wrong. That losing Charlotte wasn't just a failure, it was the greatest mistake of his life. The first thing Charlotte noticed about Asheville, North Carolina, was the quiet. It was an unfamiliar, almost unsettling silence compared to the perpetual hum of Manhattan, the honking of yellow taxis, the clattering of footsteps on concrete, the distant wail of sirens. Here, the air was still, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the breeze and the occasional chirping of birds. She stood on the small porch of her new rental home, a modest cottage tucked away on a tree-lined street. The house was far from glamorous. The paint on the shutters was peeling, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. But it was hers, her space, her fresh start. The movers had left an hour ago, their truck rumbling off down the gravel driveway. Inside, boxes were stacked haphazardly in the living room, each one labelled in her neat handwriting. Books, kitchen, miscellaneous. Charlotte sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't know where to begin. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, pulling her from her thoughts. She hesitated before picking it up, half expecting to see Ethan's name on the screen. But it wasn't him, it was Linda, her closest friend and confidant. "Hey, Charlotte. Did you make it okay?" Linda's voice was warm, comforting. Charlotte smiled faintly. "Yeah, I'm here. The place is quaint. Quaint. That doesn't sound like a glowing review." Charlotte chuckled softly. "It's perfect, Linda. It's what I need." There was a pause on the other end. "And how are you holding up?" Charlotte leaned against the counter, her fingers tracing the edge of her phone case. "I'm okay. I mean, it's a lot to process, but I'll be fine. I just need time." "You're stronger than you think, Char," Linda said firmly. "Ethan didn't deserve you." Charlotte swallowed hard, the mention of Ethan's name stirring a mixture of emotions: anger, sadness, longing. "It's not about what he deserved. It's about what we became. I think we just lost sight of each other." "Maybe," Linda conceded. "But don't forget, he made choices too. Choices that hurt you." Charlotte closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She didn't want to dwell on the past, not tonight. "Thanks for checking in, Linda. I appreciate it. Anytime. And remember, I'm just a call away if you need anything." After hanging up, Charlotte stood in the middle of the kitchen, the silence pressing in around her once again. She opened one of the boxes labeled kitchen and began unpacking, placing plates and glasses in the cabinets. The rhythm of organizing soothed her, giving her something tangible to focus on. As she worked, her mind drifted to the life she had left behind, the glittering city, the lavish penthouse, the man she had once thought was her forever. She remembered the early days of their relationship, when Ethan would surprise her with handwritten notes tucked into her books, when they would stay up late talking about their dreams and fears. But somewhere along the way, those moments had faded. Their conversations had become transactional, their connection buried under layers of ambition and resentment. And yet, despite everything, Charlotte still felt the ghost of him lingering in the corners of her heart. By the time she finished unpacking the kitchen, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the cottage in soft shadows. She stepped outside, breathing in the cool evening air. Across the street, an elderly couple strolled hand in hand, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Charlotte watched them for a moment, a pang of envy tugging at her chest. Back inside, she settled onto the couch with a blanket and a cup of tea. She opened her laptop, scrolling through job postings and local volunteer opportunities. Her gaze landed on a listing for a position at a women's shelter in town. Community outreach coordinator needed. Charlotte clicked on the description, reading about the shelter's mission to support women and children in crisis. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was modest, but it felt meaningful. A chance to rebuild not just her life, but to make a difference in the lives of others. She bookmarked the page, a flicker of hope sparking within her. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of purpose. The next morning, Charlotte woke early, the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains. She dressed simply in a cardigan and jeans, pulling her hair into a loose braid. Armed with a folder of her resume and a nervous determination, she set out for the shelter. The building was modest but inviting, a white-clapboard house with a sign that read, "Willow Haven Women's Shelter." Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and lavender. A young woman with kind eyes and a clipboard greeted her at the front desk. "Hi, I'm Charlotte Rivers," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I saw the job posting for the community outreach position." The woman smiled. "Welcome, Charlotte. I'm Sophia, the director. Why don't we sit down and chat?" As Charlotte followed Sophia into a small office, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in months. Maybe this was the fresh start she needed. Maybe, just maybe, she could build a new life here, one brick at a time. The rhythmic clatter of keyboards filled the open concept office of Montgomery Tech Innovations, located on the 42nd floor of One World Trade Center. The panoramic views of New York City were breathtaking, but Ethan Montgomery barely noticed them anymore. He was ensconced in his glass-walled corner office, eyes fixed on the array of monitors displaying stock tickers, market analyses, and lines of code for the latest software his company was developing. "Mr. Montgomery, the board meeting starts in 5 minutes. His assistant, Karen, reminded him gently from the doorway. Ethan glanced up briefly, his blue eyes sharp yet distant. "Thank you, Karen. I'll be there shortly." As she left, he leaned back in his ergonomic chair, running a hand through his dark hair. It had been 3 months since Charlotte walked out of their penthouse, and in that time, Ethan had thrown himself entirely into his work. The company's latest product, a cutting-edge artificial intelligence platform for financial forecasting, was set to launch next quarter. Investors were buzzing, and the media was already dubbing him the next Elon Musk. He should have felt triumphant. This was everything he'd worked for since founding the company in his dorm room at MIT. Yet a gnawing emptiness lingered, one that no amount of professional success seemed to fill. His phone vibrated on the desk, displaying a text message from Vivian Blake. "Don't forget dinner tonight at Le Bernardin. Can't wait to celebrate your latest triumphs." Ethan stared at the message for a moment before typing a quick reply. "Looking forward to it. See you at 8. Vivienne was the epitome of New York high society, elegant, well-connected, and always impeccably dressed. They had met at a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art shortly after his divorce was finalized. She was everything the tabloids loved, a former model turned fashion entrepreneur with her own line of luxury handbags sold at Saks Fifth Avenue. Their relationship was convenient, mutually beneficial. She enjoyed the prestige of being on his arm at events, and he appreciated the distraction she provided. But deep down, Ethan knew it was superficial, a temporary bandage over a wound that refused to heal. He stood up, straightened his Brioni suit jacket, and headed to the boardroom. As he walked past his employees, they straightened in their chairs, offering polite nods. He was their leader, their visionary, but none of them truly knew him. The board meeting was a blur of charts, projections, and strategic discussions. Ethan presented with his usual confidence, fielding questions with ease. The board members were pleased the company's valuation was soaring, and international expansion was on the horizon. "Excellent work as always, Ethan," said Richard Hale, the board chairman, as the meeting concluded. "You're making us all very wealthy men." Ethan forced a smile. "Just doing what's best for the company." As the board members filed out, Ethan lingered, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sun was setting over the Hudson River, casting a golden hue over the city. He remembered how Charlotte used to love sunsets, how she would drag him to the rooftop garden of their penthouse to watch the sky change colors. Shaking off the memory, he returned to his office to gather his things. His next appointment was a networking event at the Plaza Hotel, followed by dinner with Vivienne. His days were meticulously scheduled, leaving little room for introspection. That evening, Le Bernardin was buzzing with the elite of New York. The restaurant's reputation for exquisite seafood and impeccable service made it a favorite among the city's upper echelon. Vivian was already seated at a secluded table when Ethan arrived. "Ethan, darling," she purred, standing to kiss him on both cheeks. Her perfume was strong, a blend of jasmine and something musky. "Vivienne, you look stunning," he replied, taking in her designer dress and perfectly coiffed blonde hair. They settled into their seats, and the sommelier approached with a bottle of Chateau Margaux. Vivienne chatted animatedly about her latest fashion show, dropping names of celebrities and designers she'd mingled with. Ethan nodded politely, but his mind drifted. The conversations felt rehearsed, the laughter forced. He found himself glancing around the restaurant, observing other diners engaged in lively discussions, genuine smiles lighting up their faces. "Are you even listening, Ethan?" Vivian's tone had a sharp edge. He snapped back to the moment. "Of course. You were talking about your collaboration with Marc Jacobs." She eyed him skeptically. "You seem distracted lately. Is everything all right?" "Just the usual work's been demanding," he deflected, taking a sip of wine. Vivian reached across the table, placing her manicured hand over his. "You need to learn to relax. Life isn't all about work." The irony of her statement was not lost on him. "I'll try to keep that in mind." As the evening wore on, Ethan found himself increasingly restless. The opulence of the restaurant, the superficial conversations, the endless parade of wealth, it all felt suffocating. After dessert, Vivian excused herself to powder her nose. Ethan took the opportunity to step outside for some air. The cool night breeze was refreshing against his skin. He loosened his tie and walked a few steps away from the entrance, watching the city lights flicker. His thoughts drifted back to Charlotte. He wondered where she was, what she was doing. Had she found the peace she was searching for? Did she ever think of him? Pulling out his phone, he scrolled through his contacts until he found her name. His thumb hovered over the call button. Part of him yearned to hear her voice, to bridge the chasm between them. But what would he say? That he missed her? That his success felt empty without her? "Ethan?" Vivian's voice cut through his reverie. He quickly pocketed the phone. "Just needed some fresh air." She linked her arm through his. I thought we could stop by the lounge at the Ritz-Carlton for a nightcap." He mustered a smile. "Actually, I think I might call it a night. Early meeting tomorrow." Vivian's expression flickered with annoyance before she masked it. "Very well, we'll catch up later." They parted with a brief kiss, and Ethan watched as she slid gracefully into a waiting town car. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling unmoored. Back at his penthouse, the silence was palpable. The expansive space felt more like a museum than a home. Art pieces from galleries in Soho adorned the walls, and designer furniture filled the rooms, but there was no warmth. Ethan walked over to the Steinway piano, an instrument he had purchased because it fit the aesthetic, not because he played. He ran his fingers over the keys, pressing one softly. The note resonated, echoing through the empty space. He wandered into the library, a room lined with books he rarely had time to read. On a shelf, he spotted a worn copy of The Great Gatsby, Charlotte's favorite novel. She used to read passages aloud to him, her eyes lighting up as she delved into the tragic world of J. Gatsby. "Can't you see, Ethan? Gatsby has everything, but he's still searching for something real," she had said one evening, curled up on the sofa. At the time, he had dismissed it as literary romanticism. Now, the parallels were uncomfortably clear. Ethan sank into an armchair, the weight of his loneliness pressing down on him. For all his achievements, he felt adrift. The empire he had built seemed insignificant in the face of what he had lost. His phone buzzed a calendar reminder for a breakfast meeting with investors from Goldman Sachs. He dismissed the alert, a surge of frustration rising within him. "What am I doing?" he whispered to the empty room. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Ethan allowed himself to acknowledge the void Charlotte had left. He realized that in his pursuit of success, he had sacrificed the very things that brought meaning to his life. Determined to escape the confines of his hollow existence, he opened his laptop and began searching for flights. On a whim, he typed in Asheville, North Carolina. He recalled Charlotte mentioning the city once, talking about its vibrant art scene and the beauty of the Blue Ridge Mountains. A direct flight left the next afternoon. Without overthinking, he booked a ticket. Closing the laptop, Ethan felt a strange mix of anxiety and relief. He didn't have a plan, only a restless urge to find something he couldn't quite define. The next morning, Ethan informed Karen that he'd be taking an indefinite leave of absence. "Is everything all right, Mr. Montgomery?" she asked, concern evident in her eyes. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but I need to take care of some personal matters." She nodded respectfully. "I'll handle everything on this end. Let me know if you need anything." As he packed a suitcase, Ethan contemplated what he hoped to achieve. Was he chasing a ghost or seeking redemption? Perhaps both. He left the penthouse without looking back, descending to the bustling streets below. As the car pulled away toward JFK Airport, Ethan felt a glimmer of something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The plane touched down at Asheville Regional Airport just after noon. As Ethan Montgomery stepped off the aircraft, the crisp, cool air of the Blue Ridge Mountains greeted him. It was a stark contrast to the noise and frenzy of New York City. The terminal was small, almost quaint, with none of the towering glass structures or bustling crowds he was accustomed to. It felt quieter, simpler. Ethan adjusted the strap of his leather duffel bag as he walked through the modest terminal. He wasn't entirely sure why he had come here, but the gnawing restlessness that had consumed him over the past few months had left him with little choice. He needed answers, or perhaps just a sense of peace. The car service he had arranged was waiting for him outside. The driver, an older man with a friendly smile, greeted him warmly. "Mr. Montgomery, welcome to Asheville," he said, opening the door of a modest black sedan. Ethan nodded. "Thank you." As the car pulled away from the airport, Ethan gazed out the window. The scenery unfolded like a painting: rolling hills blanketed in trees, their leaves beginning to show hints of autumn gold and crimson. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks shrouded in a light mist. It was beautiful, almost surreal, and so unlike anything Ethan had allowed himself to experience in years. "What brings you to our little slice of heaven?" the driver asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Business," Ethan replied reflexively, though even as the words left his mouth, he realized how hollow they sounded. After a pause, he added, "And personal reasons." The driver chuckled. "Well, whether it's business or personal, I'm sure you'll find what you're looking for here. Asheville has a way of slowing things down, making you see what really matters." Ethan gave a polite nod, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to small talk, let alone the kind that seemed so earnest. Yet there was something disarming about the man's tone, something that made Ethan feel like he could breathe a little easier. The car pulled into the driveway of the Omni Grove Park Inn, a historic hotel nestled in the mountains. Ethan had chosen it for its reputation as one of Asheville's finest accommodations, though even this decision had been made in haste. The stone facade of the inn exuded old-world charm, and as he stepped inside, he was struck by the warmth of the lobby. A crackling fire burned in the massive stone hearth, and the scent of fresh pine lingered in the air. After checking in, Ethan made his way to his room, a spacious suite with a balcony that offered sweeping views of the mountains. He stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The city seemed a world away, its chaos replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. But he wasn't here for the views. Ethan pulled out his phone and stared at Charlotte's name in his contacts. His thumb hovered over the call button, just as it had the night before. A part of him feared what he might find if he reached out. Had she moved on? Was she happy without him? Shaking his head, he slipped the phone back into his pocket. No, he couldn't approach this impulsively. If he wanted to find her, he needed to do it carefully, thoughtfully. That afternoon, Ethan ventured into downtown Asheville. The city was vibrant, yet unpretentious, with art galleries, coffee shops, and street performers dotting the tree-lined streets. He walked aimlessly, observing the life around him. Couples strolled hand in hand, families laughed as they browsed local vendors, and artists sketched on benches. It was a far cry from the sterile, fast-paced environment he was used to. Eventually, he found himself in front of a small cafe called Battery Park Book Exchange, a charming blend of bookstore and wine bar. The sign in the window advertised live jazz on weekends, and through the glass he could see shelves overflowing with books. On a whim, Ethan stepped inside. The air smelled of aged paper and freshly brewed coffee. Patrons sat in cozy nooks, sipping wine as they flipped through novels. It was the kind of place Charlotte would have loved. As he wandered through the aisles, his hand brushed against the spines of the books. His fingers lingered on a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, another of Charlotte's favorites. He remembered the way she had spoken passionately about the themes of justice and morality, her eyes lighting up as she recited lines from memory. "Excuse me, sir. Can I help you find something?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. Ethan turned to see a young woman with auburn hair and a welcoming smile. She wore an apron with the cafe's logo embroidered on it. "No, thank you," he said. "Just browsing." She nodded and disappeared into the maze of bookshelves, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. He picked up the book and carried it to the counter, purchasing it almost on instinct. Later that evening, Ethan returned to his suite at the Grove Park Inn. He placed the book on the bedside table and stared at it for a long time. It was as if every little thing in Asheville reminded him of Charlotte. The books, the people, the mountains. She had always spoken of wanting to live somewhere like this, a place where life was slower, more intentional. Ethan poured himself a glass of whiskey from the minibar and stepped out onto the balcony. The night was cool, the stars bright against the inky sky. He thought about the last few months, about the choices that had led him here. For so long, he had convinced himself that work was the only thing that mattered, that success could fill the void Charlotte had left behind. But as he stood there, alone with his thoughts, he realized how wrong he had been. He took a sip of the whiskey, its warmth spreading through his chest. Tomorrow he would begin his search for her. He didn't know what he hoped to find, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose. Asheville wasn't just a place, it was a chance to rediscover what he had lost, to find Charlotte, and maybe, if she would let him, to make things right. Ethan woke the next morning to the soft glow of dawn creeping through the curtains. The mountains, veiled in mist, seemed to stretch endlessly beyond the balcony of his suite. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to be still, to take in the beauty that surrounded him. But the quiet only amplified the thoughts swirling in his mind, thoughts of Charlotte. He dressed deliberately, opting for a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans. His usual tailored suits seemed out of place here, like armor he no longer needed. Standing in front of the mirror, he hardly recognized the man staring back at him. His jawline was more defined, shadowed with stubble he hadn't bothered to shave. His eyes, once sharp and unrelenting, now held something softer, vulnerability. After grabbing his copy of To Kill a Mockingbird from the nightstand, a strange comfort he couldn't explain, he left the hotel. Today, he would begin the search. The streets of Asheville were already alive with activity. Farmers' markets spilled over with fresh produce, jars of local honey, and handmade crafts. Street musicians played folk tunes that drifted through the air. Ethan wandered through the crowds, his eyes scanning faces, hoping for some sign of her. He passed a vendor selling pottery and paused. The bowls and mugs were simple but beautiful, their glaze reminiscent of the earthy tones Charlotte had always favored. He picked up a mug, running his fingers over the smooth ceramic. The vendor, an older woman with a kind face, smiled at him. "Looking for a gift?" she asked. Ethan hesitated before nodding. "For someone I lost," he admitted, the words surprising even himself. The woman's expression softened. "Then perhaps it's not just for them. Maybe it's for you too." He bought the mug without further explanation and continued down the street, clutching the paper bag tightly. Her words lingered in his mind. What if finding Charlotte wasn't just about making amends? What if it was also about finding himself? By late morning, Ethan found himself standing in front of a community bulletin board outside a coffee shop. Flyers for local events, art classes and volunteer opportunities were pinned in a colorful mosaic. His eyes landed on a bright green flyer that read, "Willow Haven Women's Shelter needs volunteers." Willow Haven. The name felt familiar, though he couldn't place it. Beneath the bold letters was an address and a phone number. For a moment he debated whether to call or show up unannounced. He opted for the latter, folding the flyer neatly and tucking it into his pocket. The shelter was housed in an old white clapboard house on the edge of downtown. It was unassuming, with flower boxes in the windows and a hand-painted sign that read, "Willow Haven." Ethan parked across the street and sat in the car for a moment, studying the building. His heart pounded. What if Charlotte wasn't there? Worse, what if she was and didn't want to see him? He took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he crossed the street and climbed the steps to the front porch. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear the faint hum of voices inside. Pushing the door open, Ethan stepped into a small foyer. The walls were painted a calming shade of blue, adorned with framed photographs of smiling women and children. A faint smell of lavender lingered in the air. A desk sat to one side, manned by a woman with short, curly hair and glasses perched on her nose. "Hi there," she said warmly. "Can I help you?" Ethan hesitated, suddenly unsure of what to say. "I'm looking for someone," he finally managed. Her brow furrowed slightly. "We don't typically give out information about the people here. It's a privacy thing." "Of course," Ethan said quickly. "I understand. I'm trying to reconnect with someone who might be involved here." "Her name is Charlotte Rivers." The woman's expression softened, though her caution remained. "Charlotte does work here, but I'm afraid she's busy at the moment. Is there a message you'd like me to pass along?" The relief that flooded through him was almost overwhelming. She was here. She was real. "No." Ethan paused, searching for the right words. "I'd like to see her if she's available." The woman studied him for a moment, as if weighing his sincerity. "Wait here. I'll see if she's free." As she disappeared down a hallway, Ethan's hands fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times, but now that it was here, he felt unprepared. What would he say? How would she react? The minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. Finally, he heard the soft tread of footsteps approaching. Ethan's heart leapt into his throat as Charlotte stepped into view. She was as beautiful as he remembered, though there was something different about her. Her hair was pulled back into a loose braid, and she wore a simple cardigan over a floral dress. There was a softness in her demeanor, a peace that hadn't been there before. And yet, when her hazel eyes met his, they widened in surprise. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of everything they had been and everything they had lost. "Charlotte," he finally said, his voice cracking. "Hi." Her brow furrowed, and her arms crossed instinctively over her chest. "What are you doing here?" Ethan swallowed hard. "I needed to see you, to talk to you." Her expression shifted, guarded. "It's been 3 months, Ethan. What could you possibly have to say now?" "I made a mistake," he said, his voice trembling. "A terrible mistake. I let you walk away without fighting for you, and I've regretted it every day since." Charlotte's lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked away, her gaze falling to the floor. "You don't get to just show up here and say that." "I know," he said quickly. "I know I don't deserve anything from you, not after everything I put you through. But Charlotte, please, I just want a chance to make things right." She shook her head, her braid swaying gently. "Ethan, you can't undo the past. You can't just—" "I'm not here to undo the past," he interrupted, his voice desperate. "I'm here because I need to understand. To understand what I lost when I lost you." Her eyes snapped back to his, filled with something he couldn't quite read: pain, anger, maybe even a glimmer of hope. "You lost me because you chose everything else over us, over me. What's changed?" Ethan hesitated, knowing that his answer could determine everything. "I have," he said simply. "I don't know if I'm too late, but I'm here because I want to try." Charlotte's shoulders slumped slightly, as if the weight of his words pressed against her. "I don't know if trying is enough," she said quietly. The room seemed to shrink around them, the walls closing in on Ethan as he realized the enormity of the road ahead. But in her words, he sensed the faintest sliver of possibility, a door that wasn't entirely closed. And for now, that was enough. Charlotte's mind reeled as she walked back to her office after the encounter with Ethan. Her hands were trembling, and her heart beat so loudly she was sure anyone nearby could hear it. She shut the door behind her and leaned against it, staring at the small desk where she had been working moments before. The mug of tea she'd abandoned sat cold, the aroma of chamomile faint in the air. What was he doing here? How had he found her? The last few months had been painstakingly difficult, but also liberating. When she'd left New York, she hadn't just left Ethan. She had left the life they had built together, a life that no longer felt like hers. Asheville had given her space to heal, to start over, and just as she was beginning to feel grounded again, Ethan Montgomery, with all his charm and gravity, had stepped back into her world, threatening to unravel the fragile balance she'd worked so hard to achieve. Ethan stood in the foyer of the shelter, staring at the door Charlotte had disappeared behind. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, imagining what he would say, how she might react, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of seeing her again, the sharp pang of her guarded expression, the way her voice trembled with both hurt and resolve. He had expected anger. He had expected skepticism. What he hadn't expected was how much it would hurt to see the walls she had built between them. The woman at the desk, who had introduced herself earlier as Sophia, watched him carefully. "She's processing," she said gently, as if sensing his turmoil. "You can't force these things, Mr. Montgomery." Ethan nodded absently. "I just needed to see her." Sophia smiled faintly. "Sometimes seeing someone isn't enough. You need to show them why you're worth trusting again." Her words settled heavily on his shoulders. Trust. The thing he had eroded piece by piece during their marriage. How could he begin to rebuild something he had so carelessly destroyed? The next morning, Ethan arrived at the shelter again, armed with determination and a willingness to do whatever it took to make amends. He hadn't slept much, the echoes of Charlotte's words haunting him through the night. As he approached the door, he noticed a group of women gathered in the garden, pulling weeds and planting fresh flowers. Charlotte wasn't among them, but he spotted Sophia. She looked up as he approached, arching an eyebrow. "Back already." "I'd like to volunteer," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the nerves gnawing at him. Sophia studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Grab a pair of gloves. You can start with the garden." Ethan wasn't used to manual labor. His days were filled with meetings, numbers, and strategy, not dirt and shovels. But as he knelt in the soil, pulling weeds and carefully planting marigolds, he found the task strangely therapeutic. The repetitive motion allowed his mind to settle, and for the first time in months, he felt a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to financial success. By midday he was sweaty and tired, but there was a small sense of satisfaction as he looked at the neat rows of flowers. Sophia approached, offering him a glass of water. "You did good work," she said, "but I have to ask, why are you really here?" Ethan took a sip, wiping his brow. "To make things right." Sophia tilted her head. "With Charlotte or with yourself?" Her question lingered long after she walked away. Charlotte watched Ethan from the window of her office. She had seen him arrive that morning, dressed casually, with an expression of quiet determination. When he started working in the garden, she had almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Ethan Montgomery, the man who had once balked at the idea of doing his own laundry, was now knee-deep in dirt. But as the day went on, her amusement gave way to something more complicated. She couldn't deny that there was something genuine in his actions. Yet the memory of their marriage, the late nights alone, the feeling of being secondary to his ambitions, still weighed heavily on her. That afternoon, as the shelter quieted down, Charlotte found herself walking into the garden. Ethan was crouched by a bed of flowers, wiping his hands on his jeans. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "You're persistent," Charlotte said, crossing her arms. Ethan stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "I have to be." "Why?" Her voice softened, and her hazel eyes searched his. "Why now, Ethan? After all this time, why are you here?" He hesitated, the weight of her question pressing down on him. "Because losing you made me realize how much I had taken for granted, and because I can't keep pretending that work is enough. It's not." Charlotte's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the garden. Over the next few days, Ethan continued to volunteer at the shelter. He helped repair a broken fence, painted one of the bedrooms, and even organized donations in the storage room. Slowly, he began to win over the staff and the women staying there. They saw his effort, his willingness to do the unglamorous work without complaint. Charlotte, however, remained distant. She watched him from afar, unsure of how to let him back into her life, or if she even wanted to. The turning point came one evening when a storm rolled in. The power at the shelter went out, and the staff scrambled to keep everyone calm. Ethan, without hesitation, lit candles and helped lead the women to a communal area where they could stay together and feel safe. He read aloud from To Kill a Mockingbird, his deep voice steady and comforting. Charlotte stood in the doorway, watching him as he read. The glow of the candlelight illuminated his face, and for the first time in a long time she saw a version of Ethan she had almost forgotten, a man capable of tenderness, of connection. When the storm passed and the power returned, Charlotte approached him as he blew out the last candle. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan looked up, his gaze meeting hers. "I just want to help." "You did," she admitted, her voice tinged with something fragile hope. As the week went on, their conversations grew longer, their silences less strained. Charlotte began to see that Ethan wasn't just trying to win her back. He was trying to change, to become someone better. And slowly, cautiously, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, people could change. It was the last day of the week, and the early morning sun bathed the shelter's garden in soft, golden light. Charlotte stood by the kitchen window, holding a mug of tea. She watched Ethan as he worked in the garden, watering the newly planted flowers. He moved with purpose, his once immaculate hands now roughened by days of labor. It was a version of him she had never seen before, a man stripped of pretense, focused not on ambition, but on something far more meaningful. The sight stirred something in her chest. For the first time in months, the walls she had carefully constructed around her heart began to crack. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself sitting on the porch steps, a bottle of water in his hands. He was wiping the sweat from his brow when Charlotte joined him, her steps light but deliberate. She carried 2 glasses of iced lemonade and handed one to him before sitting down beside him. "Thanks," he said, his voice soft. He took a sip, savoring the coolness against the heat of the day. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the shelter laughter, footsteps, the rustle of leaves filling the space between them. Charlotte glanced at him, her hazel eyes thoughtful. "Why did you stay?" she asked finally. Ethan set the glass down on the step beside him and turned to face her. "Because I needed to prove to you and to myself that I could be more than the man I was, that I could be someone worth trusting." Charlotte's gaze didn't waver. "And do you think you've done that?" He hesitated, his expression earnest. "I don't know, but I hope I'm on the right path." She looked away, her fingers tracing the condensation on her glass. "Ethan, when I left, it wasn't just because of the life we were living. It was because I felt invisible, like I was always standing in the shadow of your ambition." Her words were a knife to his heart, but he nodded. "I know. And you were right. I was so focused on building a future that I forgot to live in the present with you." Charlotte's lips pressed into a thin line as she considered his response. "People don't change overnight." "I know," he said, his voice steady. "That's why I'm not asking for anything right now. Not forgiveness, not another chance. I just want you to know that I see you now. I see the woman I should have fought for, the woman I should have cherished, and if it takes the rest of my life to prove that to you, I'll do it." Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "I don't know if I'm ready for this for us." Ethan reached out, his hand hovering near hers, before he pulled it back. "I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm just asking you to let me be here, in whatever way you'll allow." Charlotte took a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around the glass. For months, she had carried the weight of their failed marriage, the pain of feeling unseen and unvalued. But as she looked at Ethan now, she saw a man who had been humbled, who was trying in ways he never had before. "I don't have all the answers," she said finally, "and I can't promise anything." "That's enough," Ethan said quietly. "Just being here with you is enough." The weeks that followed were marked by small, tentative steps. Ethan continued volunteering at the shelter, throwing himself into projects and earning the trust of the staff and residents. Charlotte watched him closely, noting the quiet ways he offered help without expectation or fanfare. Their conversations grew longer, their silences more comfortable. They began sharing meals, walking together in the evenings, and talking about the things they had once been too afraid to say. Ethan spoke of his regrets, his fear of failure, and the emptiness that had consumed him after their divorce. Charlotte shared her struggles, her hopes for the future, and the quiet strength she had found in starting over. One evening, as they walked through the shelter's garden, the first stars appearing in the twilight sky, Ethan stopped and turned to Charlotte. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling a small envelope from his pocket. She frowned in curiosity as he handed it to her. Inside was a deed to a piece of land on the outskirts of Asheville. "What is this?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. "It's for a new shelter," Ethan explained. "A place where more women and children can find help and safety. I want to fund it, but I don't want my name on it. I want it to be yours." Charlotte's eyes widened. "Ethan, this is too much." "It's not enough," he said simply, "but it's a start, a way for me to give back, to do something meaningful." Tears streamed down her face as she looked at him, her heart overwhelmed by the sincerity of his gesture. For the first time, she saw not the man she had divorced, but the man he was becoming. Months later, the new shelter opened its doors. Named Evelyn's Haven in honor of Charlotte's late grandmother, it quickly became a beacon of hope for the community. Ethan remained involved, though always in the background, allowing Charlotte to lead and shine in her own right. Their relationship was not without its challenges. Trust took time to rebuild, and healing was a slow, deliberate process, but they faced it together, one day at a time, with honesty and grace. On a crisp autumn evening, as they stood together in the garden of Evelyn's Haven, Charlotte reached for Ethan's hand. He looked at her, surprised, and she smiled softly. "I'm ready," she said. "For what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "For us to try again." Ethan's heart swelled with emotion as he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. The journey had been long and painful, but standing there with her, he knew it had been worth every step. They had found their way back to each other, not as the people they once were, but as the people they had become. And in that moment, beneath the stars, they began their second chance built on trust, love, and the resilience that had carried them through. Through heartbreak, mistakes, and the determination to change, they found their way back to each other, not as the people they once were, but as the people they had become. Their story reminds us that second chances aren't just about love, they're about growth, forgiveness, and the courage to try again. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe for more tales that inspire, challenge, and move us. Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what this story meant to you. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.
$1 million mansion, a glittering charity gala, and a rumor that shattered her world. These were the moments that changed Veronica Caldwell's life forever. The night she glimpsed her millionaire husband, Arthur Caldwell, in a corner suite with another woman, her heart stopped and her reality came undone. But Veronica wasn't one to wilt under heartbreak. In a blaze of fury and determination, she demanded answers. Within hours, she'd contacted high-profile attorney Lisa Bloom, filed a lawsuit, and sought to freeze Arthur's assets. Little did she know this was only the beginning. Betrayal, hidden secrets, and shocking revelations lay just beyond the door. Veronica Caldwell had been raised with modest means in a small Midwest town called Havenwood. When she first met Arthur, it was during a charity event at the luxurious Blackwell Hotel in downtown Chicago, where she had been working as an event organizer. He introduced himself with a gentle smile and impeccable charm, claiming to be a philanthropist looking to support children's healthcare initiatives. Veronica was drawn to his warmth and what appeared to be genuine kindness. Arthur was a man with an understated confidence and a magnetic presence that commanded the room. After weeks of casual dates, mostly at public places like art galleries, fancy brunch spots, and one memorable evening at the Chicago Symphony, Veronica found herself swept into Arthur's extravagant world. Diamonds, fine wines, designer gowns. These were all new to her. Yet, despite the sudden wealth and whirlwind romance, Arthur always seemed open and attentive, making her feel truly seen. But those early days were a stark contrast to what Veronica discovered that fateful evening at the Caldwell mansion. The estate, perched on 10 acres just outside the city, boasted a lush garden, a private lake, and a breathtaking view of the skyline. Arthur often hosted lavish fundraisers there, inviting everyone from local politicians to Hollywood celebrities. At one such event, Veronica, now Mrs. Caldwell for nearly 3 years, noticed her husband had slipped away from the main gathering. When he didn't return, she went searching. She passed the rose garden, circled around the pool house, and eventually found herself outside the upstairs study. A strange giggle echoed through the hallway. With her hand trembling on the doorknob, she peeked inside. There, under the glow of a crystal chandelier, Arthur's arms were intimately wrapped around a woman Veronica had never seen before. Her world cracked in an instant. In that moment, Veronica felt her entire body go numb. She wanted to burst through the door, confront them both, and demand answers. But something stopped her. Instead, she crept backward, heart-hammering tears stinging her eyes, until she found her way back downstairs. She needed to breathe. She needed to think. Throughout the rest of the evening, she maintained her composure with an otherworldly grace she never knew she possessed. She greeted guests engaged in polite conversation, forced laughter when required. The man she believed was her loving husband eventually reappeared, guiding that same mystery woman around the party, with a dazzling smile on his face. Veronica watched from a distance. Her mind spiraled, replaying his affectionate gaze, the gentle way he pressed a hand to the woman's back. The reality settled in Arthur Caldwell. Her beloved husband was having an affair right there in their home. The next morning, Veronica woke early, exhausted but resolute. She needed clarity, so she confronted Arthur the moment he walked into the breakfast lounge. He greeted her with a casual kiss on the cheek, as if nothing had happened. But Veronica could see the flicker of panic in his eyes when she slid her phone across the marble table, showing him a candid photo she'd managed to snap of him and his companion the night before. Arthur's expression froze, and for a moment his perpetual calm facade cracked. He tried to stammer out an excuse, something about a harmless flirtation, a misunderstanding the woman being a potential investor. Veronica felt her stomach churn. She might have believed him once, but the way he'd held that stranger was anything but professional. Before Arthur could collect himself, she walked out. The weight of betrayal settled heavily on her shoulders, fueling her next step. Though Veronica had never considered divorce or anything drastic, she wasn't naive. Growing up with a single mother who struggled to make ends meet taught her one thing. Preparation was everything. She had a friend from college, Laura Singletary, who now worked as an associate at a prestigious law firm in Chicago. Veronica left the mansion and sped through winding roads until she reached Laura's office. Tearing up in the reception area, Veronica recounted the entire incident, from the moment she caught Arthur in the act to his feeble denials. Laura, always pragmatic and fiercely loyal, recommended they call in a top-tier attorney specializing in complex divorces and asset management. That was when Lisa Bloom's name came up. Realizing how complicated things might get, especially given Arthur's wealth and political connections, Veronica agreed. She wanted the best, and if it meant going toe-to-toe with her husband's empire, so be it. Within hours, Laura had arranged a meeting in Lisa Bloom's chic downtown office. Veronica sat in a plush leather chair, scanning the glossy photos of high-profile clients on the walls, feeling both intimidated and strangely emboldened. Lisa entered with a focused energy, wearing a smart black suit and practical heels. She listened intently as Veronica poured out her story. When Veronica finished, Lisa's eyes narrowed with professional determination. "We have options," she said firmly, detailing the potential legal strategies. Filing for divorce was straightforward. But if Arthur was indeed funneling money or shifting assets around, Veronica needed to act fast to ensure she got her fair share. You'd be surprised, Lisa warned, how many times wealthy spouses try to hide funds overseas or in obscure trusts once they suspect a breakup. Veronica's head swirled, but she knew one thing: she had to protect herself. With a deep breath, she agreed to proceed. On Lisa's advice, they decided to file a petition for divorce and a motion to freeze Arthur's assets immediately. Veronica wasn't out for revenge. At least that's what she told herself. But she'd poured her heart into the marriage, invested her life in supporting Arthur's philanthropic endeavors. She wasn't about to be left with nothing if he decided to vanish half his fortune before the ink on the divorce papers dried. The legal process began with a flurry of phone calls, paperwork, and discreet investigations into Arthur's financial dealings. Veronica felt both liberated and terrified. Each phone call with Lisa or Laura revealed more complexities: shell companies overseas, accounts, business partners who might not be entirely legitimate. She discovered that Arthur was far wealthier than she'd even realized. The sense of betrayal grew deeper. Not only had he been unfaithful, he'd also kept hidden parts of his life from her. The first real confrontation happened just 3 days after she filed. Veronica was alone in the Caldwell mansion, in the very study where she'd caught Arthur cheating. She was packing up some personal belongings when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Arthur appeared, face taut with anger, a crumpled envelope in his hand. "You served me divorce papers," he said, voice shaking with fury. Veronica tried to stand her ground, but fear twisted in her stomach. Arthur looked like a man pushed beyond his limits. "You cheated on me," she responded, her voice surprisingly steady. "There's no going back." Arthur launched into an elaborate denial, trying every angle, blame, begging threats. He claimed her lawsuit was a blatant money grab, accusing her of only wanting his fortune. Veronica's hands trembled, but her resolve remained firm. She walked out, letting his accusations echo unanswered behind her. News of the divorce filing spread through Chicago's high society in a matter of hours. Rumors swirled at country clubs, upscale boutiques, and charity luncheons. Veronica's phone buzzed non-stop with messages from so-called friends and acquaintances. Some offered fake sympathy fishing for juicy details. Others criticized her, whispering that she was a gold digger, trying to ruin poor Arthur Caldwell. Public opinion seemed divided. Arthur had a long-standing reputation as a philanthropic hero, especially for his donations to children's hospitals. Many found it hard to believe he could have engaged in an affair, let alone hidden a labyrinth of assets. Veronica's quiet heartbreak was overshadowed by the scandal of the lawsuit as tabloids and gossip columns exploded with sensational headlines. Millionaire mogul's marriage meltdown, Arthur Caldwell's dirty secrets. Veronica felt exposed, betrayed not just by Arthur, but by the so-called friends who relished in her downfall. In the midst of this media storm, Veronica found unexpected allies. One evening, she received a call from Deborah Knight, a long-time patron of the arts. Deborah and her husband had been close to Arthur and Veronica, but Deborah confessed that she had witnessed odd financial dealings over the years. She'd never said anything before, not wanting to stir the waters. Deborah offered to share what she knew about Arthur's suspicious transactions. Things like off-the-record property deals and shell corporations set up in the Caymans. "I'm not proud of staying silent," Deborah said, "but I'm willing to help if it means stopping him from hurting more people." Veronica felt a surge of gratitude, relieved that she wasn't alone. Perhaps she realized some in their circle were more than superficial partygoers. They were individuals of conscience, willing to support her in this legal and emotional minefield. Meanwhile, Arthur's legal team swung into action. They filed a countersuit, claiming Veronica had violated prenuptial agreements Veronica never even remembered signing. Supposedly, these documents limited her claim on his estate and required her to keep certain marital disputes private. Arthur's lawyers accused Veronica of defamation, insisting she had tarnished his public image by speaking to the press. The pressure was immense. Paparazzi camped outside Veronica's new apartment, in a modest downtown building, snapping photos whenever she left to meet Lisa Bloom. Journalists hounded her mother for interviews, digging into every aspect of her past. And swirling amid it all were questions about the mystery woman. Who was she, and what role did she play in Arthur's business? Empire Lisa advised Veronica to keep a low profile. But Veronica realized that the more she tried to hide, the more the tabloids conjured false narratives about her. As depositions and court hearings loomed, Veronica discovered a new layer of deceit. A friend with contacts in city government hinted that Arthur was planning to transfer significant capital to a secret bank account in Switzerland. Furious and frightened, Veronica relayed this information to Lisa. If that transfer happened before the asset freeze took effect, Veronica might lose the financial security she sought, making it nearly impossible to claim what was legally hers. Lisa moved swiftly, filing motions and lobbying the judge for an emergency hearing to freeze Arthur's assets immediately, citing the risk of asset dissipation. It was a bold move and an unprecedented one. In that jurisdiction, usually these matters took months to settle, and judges were reluctant to freeze someone's finances without irrefutable evidence. But the potential for fraud was too great to ignore. The showdown in court was set, and tensions soared to new heights. Standing outside the courthouse with cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions, Veronica felt her heart pounding like a bass drum. She spotted Arthur exiting his black luxury sedan across the street, flanked by his high-powered legal team. He offered the crowd a tight-lipped smile. The hearing room was surprisingly small, adorned with old wood paneling and a single American flag by the judge's bench. Veronica sat beside Lisa Bloom and Laura, her hands trembling beneath the table. Arthur's attorney, a seasoned litigator named Bradley Fisher, exuded confidence as he argued that there was no credible evidence Arthur was hiding assets. But Lisa had prepared meticulously. She presented emails from Deborah Knight, referencing suspicious accounts, photographs of Arthur's confidential files, and even a recorded phone conversation provided anonymously that hinted at Arthur's intention to offload millions in real estate. The judge listened intently, scowling as he leafed through the documents. After 2 hours of tense testimony and fervent arguments, the judge leaned forward. He reprimanded Arthur's team for lack of transparency and expressed concern about the possibility of undisclosed financial maneuvers. Mr. Caldwell, the judge, intoned voice, echoing in the silent chamber. The evidence is concerning. Therefore, pending further investigation, I'm granting the motion to temporarily freeze your primary liquid assets. A stunned hush fell over the courtroom. Veronica couldn't breathe. She glanced at Arthur, whose face blanched, eyes flashing with outrage. He whispered something to his attorney before storming out. In the hallway, reporters bombarded Veronica with questions. Though her heart hammered, she kept her statement brief. I have confidence in our judicial system and believe the truth will come out. The cameras captured her every word, broadcasting the image of a determined woman refusing to back down against a powerful millionaire. That night, Veronica returned to her apartment and found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a letter from an anonymous source typed in neat block letters. It warned her of imminent threats, suggesting that Arthur might retaliate in ways beyond legal maneuvers. She felt her blood turn cold, recalling stories of wealthy tycoons who went to extreme lengths to preserve their fortunes. Terrified, she showed the letter to Lisa Bloom the next morning. Lisa looked alarmed. I'll hire a private security consultant, she said. This might just be a scare tactic, but we can't take any chances. Veronica reluctantly agreed. A small team of security professionals began monitoring her building's entrance, and she was advised to vary her driving routes. She felt like she was living in a crime thriller rather than a divorce dispute. But if Arthur was truly desperate, who knew what he might do next? In an effort to regain some normalcy, Veronica decided to pay a visit to her mother, Marianne Parker, back in Havenwood. She arrived in the sleepy town at dusk, seeking solace in the familiar. The small house with peeling white paint stood as a warm reminder of simpler days. Marianne opened the door with teary eyes and enveloped her daughter in a hug. Inside over cups of mint tea, Veronica confided everything about Arthur's affair, the lawsuit and the mounting threats. Marianne listened quietly. Sadness etched across her face. I always felt there was something too perfect about Arthur, she admitted. You deserved someone honest, someone who didn't hide behind a $1 million smile. Despite the comfort of her mother's presence, Veronica's mind couldn't rest. She knew she couldn't stay in Havenwood for long. Court dates and 1,000 unanswered questions awaited her back in the city. Returning to Chicago, Veronica discovered Arthur had unleashed a new wave of attacks. Publicly, he insisted Veronica was psychologically unstable, citing episodes from her past, a flat-out lie he'd likely fabricated. A swarm of reporters camped outside her apartment, speculating about her mental health. Friends called in confusion. Some even scolded her for dragging Arthur's name through the mud. Lisa Bloom arranged a press conference at her firm's office to set the record straight. Veronica, nerves on edge, stood before a sea of microphones, and delivered a measured statement. "These allegations are false. I have never been diagnosed with any mental health condition, nor have I experienced episodes. I am simply standing up for my rights." She left immediately afterward, tears brimming. The cruelty of Arthur's campaign to discredit her felt like a second betrayal, compounding the heartbreak she'd already endured from his affair. Yet amidst the chaos, a breakthrough arrived. Laura Singletary had been quietly digging into Arthur's corporate records. Late one evening, she called Veronica, voice trembling with excitement. "I've found something big," she whispered. "Arthur's name is tied to shell companies that own multi-million-dollar condos in Dubai, plus a luxury yacht in Monaco, assets he never declared." Veronica's heart pounded. If this was true, it could strengthen her case immeasurably. The existence of hidden foreign properties would prove Arthur's efforts to conceal wealth. Laura promised to pass the information to Lisa Bloom so they could present it at the next hearing. That night, Veronica scarcely slept. Though the revelations were disturbing, they also gave her a spark of hope. Every new piece of evidence chipped away at Arthur's untouchable facade. Perhaps she wasn't fighting an impossible battle after all. Maybe, just maybe, truth would prevail. At the subsequent hearing, Lisa Bloom filed additional motions to freeze all international assets tied to Arthur Caldwell. Predictably, Arthur's team fought back, denying any wrongdoing. Bradley Fisher produced alleged independent audits, claiming no hidden holdings existed. But Lisa seized on Laura's evidence bank statements, property registrations, and even pictures of Arthur cruising on the very yacht he claimed he didn't own. The judge, now wary of Arthur's denials, allowed more time for forensic accountants to comb through the labyrinth of financial documents. He extended the asset freeze, broadening its scope to include any property or account where Arthur Caldwell was a beneficiary. A hush fell over the courtroom as the judge spoke those words. Arthur looked like he'd swallowed glass. Outside, Veronica exhaled a shaky sigh of relief. With each legal victory, she felt the grip of Arthur's power loosening, though she knew the fight was far from over. In the weeks that followed, Veronica wrestled with her emotions. The love she once felt for Arthur lingered like a phantom ache. She couldn't deny that they'd shared good times charity galas, where she felt proud of his generosity, heartfelt moments spent planning a future together, evenings gazing at the lake from their bedroom window. But that Arthur seemed like a distant memory now. The man threatening her in court, undermining her reputation, and brazenly lying about hidden assets was a stranger. She tried to remember when she'd first noticed cracks in their relationship. Maybe it was when he started taking more business trips without explanation, or when he began making grand promises but never followed through. Despite the pain, Veronica steeled herself. This was the path she'd chosen, and she would see it through. She wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting for her dignity, her self-respect. One afternoon, as Veronica reviewed documents in Lisa's office, a knock at the door startled them both. A young paralegal walked in, looking visibly shaken. "Mr. Caldwell's attorneys just served a subpoena for your personal diaries and journals," she said, handing over a stack of papers. Veronica felt her cheeks burn. She had never kept a detailed diary, but the attempt to pry into her private thoughts was alarming. Lisa read through the subpoena, her expression turning grim. "They're trying to build a narrative that you're emotionally unstable and vindictive," she explained. "We'll file a motion to quash this, but it's a reminder of how far Arthur is willing to go." A wave of indignation washed over Veronica. It wasn't enough for Arthur to cheat and lie. He wanted to scour her most personal moments, all for the sake of destroying her credibility in court. That evening, Veronica retreated to her apartment, bolting the door against the world. She sank onto the couch, hugging a throw pillow, feeling utterly drained. A year ago, her life was filled with optimism plans for children, philanthropic projects, even the possibility of expanding their charitable foundation. Now she was mired in depositions, asset traces, and vicious public speculation. She closed her eyes, recalling the last words her mother spoke before she left Havenwood Hold. Onto your truth, Veronica. People can spin lies all they want, but if you don't bend, they can't break you. She repeated those words like a mantra. Finally, summoning her courage, Veronica opened her laptop and typed out a statement of her own. She decided to speak directly to the press, carefully, and with Lisa's oversight. She would reveal the facts as she knew them. No embellishments, just the stark truth of Arthur Caldwell's betrayal. The next morning, Veronica's statement was published in several reputable outlets, including the Chicago Tribune. She wrote plainly about discovering Arthur's affair, about the suspicious financial behavior, and about her desire for a fair divorce settlement. Nothing more, nothing less. She didn't mention the intimidation tactics or the threatening letter. Instead, she let the evidence of hidden assets speak for itself. Almost immediately, social media lit up. To Veronica's relief, a growing number of voices expressed sympathy and support, condemning Arthur's actions. Over time, the narrative shifted slightly. People began to see beyond the tabloid's sensational headlines and question the philanthropic image Arthur had so carefully cultivated. Arthur's PR machine fired back, releasing a glossy interview in which he insisted he was the victim of a vindictive spouse. But for the first time, people seemed less inclined to believe him. As the divorce case neared its most critical stage, Veronica's nights were haunted by nightmares, Arthur towering over her gavel in hand, banishing her to a life of isolation and poverty. She'd wake in a cold sweat, gasping for air, only to find herself alone in her tiny apartment. Yet each day she donned her armor of resolve and faced new legal challenges. She sat through excruciating depositions, endured the scorn of Arthur's attorneys, and battled the relentless swirl of public gossip. Each time, Arthur tried to twist facts or smear her character. Lisa produced evidence that steadily eroded his defenses. Slowly, methodically, the puzzle pieces were coming together. The yacht in Monaco, the condos in Dubai, the secret Swiss account. Veronica could almost see the day she'd stand victorious in court, the day she'd reclaim her life and her pride. Then came an unexpected twist. A woman named Juliana Martinez reached out to Lisa's office claiming to be Arthur's former personal assistant. Nervous and hesitant, she confessed she had direct knowledge of Arthur's illicit dealings. Juliana said she could provide concrete proof emails, bank transfers, phone call recordings. But she was scared. Arthur had once threatened to ruin her career if she ever turned on him. Veronica and Lisa arranged a discreet meeting at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Juliana arrived looking over her shoulder as if she expected Arthur to materialize at any moment. She produced a folder stuffed with documents. "He made me sign NDAs," Juliana whispered, "but I can't keep quiet anymore. Not after what he did to you." Flipping through the folder, Veronica's eyes widened at the incriminating details transfers from Arthur's main company to offshore accounts. This could be the smoking gun they needed. The next day, Lisa Bloom filed new motions with this fresh evidence. Arthur's attorney, Bradley Fisher, tried to dismiss Juliana's testimony as the ramblings of a disgruntled ex-employee. However, the authenticity of the documents was quickly verified by forensic experts. Suddenly, Arthur found himself cornered. As tensions mounted, rumors circulated that Arthur was considering an out-of-court settlement. He feared a lengthy trial would expose more of his secrets, tarnishing his carefully maintained image beyond repair. Yet Veronica couldn't shake the feeling that he was stalling, waiting for an opportunity to strike back or shift funds one last time. Lisa cautioned Veronica to stay alert. If Arthur decided to settle, it might come with conditions like strict confidentiality clauses. But Veronica was beyond caring about hush money. She wanted accountability. She was determined to stand her ground, no matter how fiercely Arthur fought to maintain control. The court date for the next major hearing arrived under the weight of an overcast sky. Veronica dressed in a simple navy suit, her hair pulled back neatly. As she entered the courthouse, she spotted a throng of reporters again. But she also saw familiar faces, friends like Deborah Knight and Laura Singletree, there to offer moral support. Even her mother was in the crowd, holding Veronica's hand briefly before she stepped into the hearing room. Arthur was already inside, pacing near the defense table. His skin looked pale, and his eyes brimmed with a jittery anger. When proceedings began, Lisa systematically presented the newly obtained documents from Juliana Martinez. The judge examined them, asked questions, listened to both sides. By midday, it was clear the court had seen enough to suspect significant financial impropriety. Arthur's team requested a recess to consult privately. The tension in the room was palpable. During the recess, Arthur surprised everyone by approaching Veronica in the hallway. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "We don't need to fight like this," he said, voice low. "We can work out an arrangement." For a fleeting moment, Veronica glimpsed the Arthur she once knew, the caring philanthropist, the man who'd first swept her off her feet. But she also remembered his betrayal, the lies, the smear campaign, the hidden assets. She met his gaze. "We could have Arthur," she replied, "but you made it impossible." He swallowed hard and reached into his pocket, pulling out a handwritten note. "My settlement offer," he said, thrusting it at her. Veronica took it, scanning the figures. It was a substantial sum, enough to ensure she'd live comfortably for the rest of her life. But it came with a catch, a strict non-disclosure agreement about his affairs. Veronica's heart pounded as she read the terms. She could end this war now. No more court battles. No more invasive questions. No more paparazzi. But she'd have to bury the truth, pretend the affair and the underhanded asset hiding never happened. She'd be free financially, but gagged morally. When she looked up, Arthur's expression was calm, almost smug. He assumed she would jump at the chance to walk away from the drama. She shook her head slowly, handing back the note. "I can't," she said. "I won't be silenced." Anger flared in his eyes. He snatched the paper and stormed off. Veronica watched him go, shaky but resolute. Perhaps turning down that money was foolish, but she realized something vital. She needed justice, not just a payout. She walked back into the courtroom, prepared for whatever was next. The hearing resumed, and the judge pressed both sides for clarity. Lisa Bloom reiterated the evidence, the affair, the financial duplicity, the intimidation attempts. Bradley Fisher tried to undermine Juliana Martinez's credibility, but each time Lisa countered with another piece of corroborating evidence. Eventually the judge announced his ruling on the temporary measures. The asset freeze would continue and expand to include any account or property discovered during the ongoing investigation. Moreover, the judge suggested that if further wrongdoing was uncovered, Arthur Caldwell could face criminal charges for fraud or perjury. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Arthur sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Veronica's pulse throbbed in her ears. She knew this was a monumental victory, yet it felt surreal. She'd gone from a naive event organizer to a woman standing on the verge of defeating one of the city's most influential figures. outside the press ambushed them again. Arthur rushed past, ignoring the barrage of questions. Veronica stood with Lisa Bloom at her side, delivering a concise statement. "I'm grateful the court has taken steps to protect my rights. The truth is what matters most here." She retreated to a nearby cafe, adrenaline still surging. Laura and Deborah joined her, exchanging hugs and tearful smiles. "You did it," Deborah said softly. "You really stood up to him." But Veronica couldn't bring herself to fully celebrate. The final trial was still ahead, and she knew Arthur wouldn't back down easily. There were still details to unearth, more secrets that could emerge. And beyond the legal struggle, she also had to heal personally from the betrayal, from the public scrutiny, from the collapse of the life she once believed was perfect. For now, though, she savored a small taste of triumph. Over the next few weeks, forensic accountants kept uncovering evidence of Arthur's deceptive practices. Each new revelation painted a damning portrait of a man willing to manipulate his philanthropy business ventures and personal relationships to maintain a veneer of respectability. Meanwhile, Arthur's legal team scrambled to discredit sources. They claimed that Juliana Martinez had been bribed, that Deborah Knight bore a personal grudge, that Veronica had orchestrated a grand scheme to frame Arthur. Yet none of these accusations held up under scrutiny. It was a media circus. Talk shows debated the scandal, with some hosts defending Arthur's philanthropic track record, while others condemned his apparent hypocrisy. Late-night comedians even made jokes about hidden yachts and questionable Swiss accounts. Veronica watched it all with a sense of detachment. Her pain was real, but it had become fodder for national entertainment, and she couldn't entirely escape that reality. Amid the legal wrangling, Veronica's personal life stood in shambles. She'd lost friends who sided with Arthur out of fear or loyalty. She avoided major social events, uncertain whether she'd face hostility or pity. The only bright spots were the unwavering support of her mother, Laura Deborah, and a handful of true friends who believed in her. During this time, she rekindled old passions, writing poetry, practicing yoga, volunteering at a local shelter. These small acts gave her a sense of purpose beyond the courtroom drama. She began to realize that she wasn't just fighting against Arthur. She was fighting to rediscover herself, her identity, after years of molding her life around his pursuits. One late evening, she penned a poem about resilience, tears slipping down her cheeks. Maybe she thought this heartbreak would be the crucible that forged a stronger version of herself. As the final trial date approached, Arthur made one last desperate move. His lawyers filed a motion to remove the presiding judge, alleging bias. They produced quotes from prior hearings, claiming the judge had shown a consistent prejudice against Arthur's wealth. The stunt caused a brief delay, but ultimately failed. The appellate court found no grounds for recusal. Yet the maneuver signaled just how far Arthur was willing to go. It fueled Veronica's anxiety, knowing he still had cards to play. She braced herself for the possibility that new damaging information about her might surface, though she couldn't imagine what else Arthur could concoct. And then, in a twist that surprised everyone, the identity of the mystery woman finally surfaced. A tabloid obtained photos of her with Arthur on a private jet. She was identified as Simone Duval, a high-powered consultant known for her ruthless business tactics. The saga deepened. Simone Duval, her name alone carried an aura of intrigue. Rumors about her influence on Arthur's finances spread like wildfire. Some said she was his silent partner, advising him on secret offshore investments. Others claimed she was the mastermind behind his entire operation. Veronica felt a strange mixture of relief and fury. At least now the woman had a name and face, dispelling the painful mystery. But the fact that Simone might have orchestrated Arthur's deceit made her betrayal even more palpable. Word reached Veronica that Simone was preparing to testify on Arthur's behalf, presumably to challenge the narrative around his finances. Lisa, however, wasn't fazed. "If they want to put her on the stand, that could backfire," she remarked. "We have more than enough evidence to contradict anything she says." Still, the thought of facing Simone in court filled Veronica with dread. She braced for yet another confrontation. The morning of the trial's opening arguments arrived in a blur of tension. Veronica had hardly slept the night before. She dressed carefully, choosing a charcoal grey suit and a simple pendant necklace her mother had given her years ago. It felt like armor, an emblem of her roots and the resilience she'd inherited. When she walked into the courtroom, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Journalists packed the gallery laptops open and cameras at the ready. Arthur sat at the defense table, stoic Simone Duval by his side, whispering to Bradley Fisher. She wore a power suit in deep burgundy, exuding confidence. Lisa Bloom began her opening statement with measured precision, outlining Arthur's pattern of financial deception, the evidence from Juliana Martinez, and the suspicious timeline of overseas transfers. She ended with a quiet but firm assertion. "This case is about truth and ensuring that my client, Mrs. Caldwell, receives justice." Bradley Fisher responded by painting Arthur as a generous philanthropist, misunderstood and maligned by a vengeful spouse. He lambasted Veronica's aggressive tactics and accused her of orchestrating a smear campaign. Simone Duval nodded in agreement, occasionally whispering suggestions to the defense team. Witness testimonies followed. Deborah Knight took the stand describing the suspicious activity she'd witnessed. Juliana Martinez testified next, her voice trembling, but her story consistent and damning. She detailed how Simone Duval guided Arthur in transferring funds to obscure accounts. She even provided dates and account numbers. The defense tried to poke holes, questioning Juliana's credibility and highlighting her departure from Arthur's employment on strained terms. Yet each jab felt insufficient against the weight of the physical documents she provided. The tension was palpable as the gallery hung on every word, searching for cracks in the narratives. Then it was Simone Duval's turn to take the stand. The courtroom stilled as she stood up, every eye fixed on her striking figure. She wore a sleek burgundy pantsuit and a calm, collected expression, as though the entire proceeding was just another boardroom pitch. With practiced poise, she walked to the witness box and sat folding her hands in her lap. Her voice, when she began, was crisp, authoritative, and free of any trace of guilt. "I am a business consultant," Simone stated. "I was hired by Mr. Caldwell to advise on international expansion strategies. At no point did I assist him in hiding assets or in misleading anyone, including his wife." Lisa Bloom, seated beside Veronica, leaned forward slightly, noting Simone's deliberate choice of words. The air in the room shifted. This wasn't just testimony. It was a performance. Simone continued denying all allegations. She dismissed the email referencing avoiding scrutiny as a misunderstood industry phrase. It referred to competitive market analysis, she claimed. Nothing to do with the divorce. Veronica sat motionless, eyes locked on Simone. Every denial felt like a slap. This was the woman who'd stood in their home, whispered in Arthur's ear, guided him through the maze of deceit. The audacity of her confident denials made Veronica's stomach churn. Lisa approached the podium for cross-examination. "Ms. Duval, let's go over the timeline," she began. Tone calm, but sharp. "You were in frequent communication with Mr. Caldwell in the weeks leading up to his wife's discovery of hidden assets." "Correct. Yes, Simone said. We were working on a new investment vehicle in the Middle East. Lisa clicked her remote, and the courtroom screen flickered to life, displaying a series of emails, many of them between Simone and Arthur. The subject lines were technical, but one stood out: urgent trust structuring to shield holdings. Care to explain this one? Lisa asked. Simone shifted. It was a legal conversation around forming a trust to protect business interests. Standard. Lisa's voice sharpened. Standard? Then why does this email, dated 1 week after Mrs. Caldwell confronted her husband, mention the need to reroute investments before the asset freeze request goes through? A murmur rippled through the gallery. Simone blinked rapidly, her composure visibly cracking for the first time. I can't speak to Arthur's intentions, she said. I just followed instructions. I wasn't aware of any legal filings. Lisa pressed further, presenting internal memos that included Simone's annotations, some even in her handwriting. One clearly read, "Move fast, no paper trail." Simone stammered. These could have been misinterpreted, Lisa interrupted. You're under oath, Ms. Duval. Silence hung heavy in the air. Simone's fingers tapped nervously on the wooden edge of the stand. Her earlier confidence dissolved into a growing unease. From her seat, Veronica saw the shift in the jury's expressions. Doubt had crept in. They were no longer seeing a sophisticated consultant. They were seeing someone implicated, someone with too much access, too much knowledge, and too many reasons to lie. Lisa concluded her cross with a piercing statement. Ms. Duval, you didn't just consult, you conspired, and the evidence shows it. The judge called for a brief recess, allowing the courtroom to breathe. Simone stepped down, face pale, lips tightly pressed. Arthur avoided her gaze. Back at their table, Lisa turned to Veronica. She's rattled, and that helps us. A lot. Veronica exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. For weeks, she had feared Simone's testimony would destroy her case. But now the cracks in Simone's mask were visible to everyone. The woman who had once operated from the shadows now found herself under the harshest light, and she was beginning to crumble. As the courtroom doors closed behind Simone, Veronica felt a subtle shift in momentum. The tide was turning. Truth, after months of suffocation, was finally clawing its way to the surface. The trial pressed on like a war of attrition. Every day in court felt like a battlefield. And on the final day of witness testimony, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken anticipation. Arthur Caldwell was called to the stand. He adjusted his tie with a measured calm, walking slowly to the witness box as cameras outside continued flashing through the courthouse windows. Dressed in a tailored grey suit, he wore the same carefully constructed expression of dignity he had worn at every gala and photo op for years. As he took the oath, his gaze drifted briefly toward Veronica. She didn't flinch. She'd spent months preparing for this moment. Arthur's attorney, Bradley Fisher, began the direct examination. His tone was sympathetic, almost theatrical. Mr. Caldwell, he asked, can you explain your business dealings that have been so harshly scrutinized in recent weeks? Arthur spoke with the calculated grace of a politician. I run a multifaceted business empire. It involves us in multiple countries, countless accounts, and teams of advisors. I never intended to hide anything from anyone, least of all my wife. He sighed dramatically. If there were errors, they were administrative, not malicious. I trusted consultants like Simone Duval to handle financial logistics. I regret not monitoring everything more closely. To the untrained ear, he sounded credible, even remorseful. But Veronica saw the familiar flicker in his eyes, manipulation, wrapped wrapped in polished charm. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Lisa Bloom stood, her legal pad in hand, and walked toward the witness box. "Mr. Caldwell," she began, "do you deny threatening Juliana Martinez with professional retaliation if she exposed your financial arrangements?" Arthur stiffened. "Absolutely. I never threatened anyone." Lisa nodded, flipping through documents. "So this voicemail." She clicked a button on her laptop. "Isn't your voice." The courtroom filled with Arthur's unmistakable tone, harsh and low. "You don't want to make enemies out of people who pay your salary. Think about your future." Gasps broke out. Arthur's face turned a shade paler. "That was taken out of context," he stammered. Lisa didn't blink. "Was this also taken out of context?" She held up a printout of an email chain between Arthur and Simone, discussing offshore accounts. One line from Arthur read, "Move the money before she gets the courts involved." Arthur hesitated again. "I was referring to a business restructuring, not hiding funds from my wife." Lisa tilted her head. "And the timing one day, after Mrs. Caldwell confronted you about your affair. That's coincidence." The pressure mounted with every question. Arthur began to unravel, not dramatically, but in subtle, telling ways. He blinked more often. His answers came slower. He glanced toward Simone for reassurance, but she kept her eyes locked on the table. Lisa's final question silenced the room. "Mr. Caldwell, you've portrayed yourself as a victim of media attacks, of betrayal by employees, even of your wife. But isn't the truth far simpler? You cheated. You lied. You hid millions. And now you're trying to rewrite the narrative because you got caught." Arthur's mouth opened, then closed. The room waited, but no defense came, not even from Bradley Fisher, who quietly shuffled his notes. As Lisa returned to her seat, she whispered to Veronica, "We just tipped the scale." Closing arguments followed swiftly. Lisa spoke with quiet confidence, weaving a clear and damning story from the months of evidence and testimony. "This is not about bitterness," she said. "It's about betrayal, about truth, about accountability." Bradley tried one last time to recast Arthur as a flawed but generous man. He invoked Arthur's charity work, his reputation, and even his emotional turmoil. But the energy in the room had shifted. Outside, reporters lined the courthouse steps. Arthur exited first, walking briskly past flashing cameras, face tight. Simone trailed behind him, stone-faced and silent. Veronica emerged moments later, flanked by Lisa and Laura. She didn't speak to reporters that day. She didn't have to, because by now, the world had started to see through Arthur Caldwell, and it was Veronica's truth they believed. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as everyone waited for the judge to return with his written decision. The tension in the air felt as thick as fog. Veronica sat in the front row, flanked by Lisa Bloom and Laura Singletary. Her hands were cold, despite the warmth of the courtroom clenched tightly in her lap. Across the room, Arthur sat rigid, jaw-clenched, Simone Duval by his side. Their polished exterior remained intact, but Veronica could see the stiffness in Arthur's movements, the subtle tells of a man expecting defeat. Rain trickled down the tall courtroom windows as the judge finally entered. The room fell into silence, broken only by the shuffling of papers and the occasional cough. The judge adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to read from a printed sheet. After reviewing the substantial volume of evidence, including financial documents, email communications, testimony from key witnesses and cross-examinations presented by both parties, This court finds that Mr. Arthur Caldwell willfully concealed marital assets in an effort to deprive Mrs. Veronica Caldwell of her lawful share in divorce proceedings. A quiet gasp escaped from somewhere in the gallery. Veronica inhaled sharply, eyes locked on the judge as he continued. Furthermore, the court acknowledges a pattern of coercion, intimidation, and manipulation directed at Mrs. Caldwell and at third-party witnesses. These actions are incompatible with the obligations of good faith expected in legal proceedings. The judge paused, glanced over his reading glasses at Arthur, then continued. Accordingly, the court grants Mrs. Caldwell a divorce under terms favorable to her. She shall be awarded a comprehensive settlement that includes ownership of the couple's Chicago estate, a significant share of Mr. Caldwell's disclosed and undisclosed assets, as verified by forensic investigation, and continued protection under the asset freeze until all hidden accounts are accounted for. Arthur's eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a bitter line. Simone looked stunned, her face pale. The judge wasn't done. In addition, he said firmly, "This court is forwarding evidence of potential financial fraud and perjury to the state attorney's office for further investigation." That final sentence landed like a bomb. A ripple of shock spread across the room. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Arthur's posture collapsed ever so slightly, the image of power slipping away in real time. Veronica sat frozen, overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. Relief, justice, vindication, and a strange, sudden weightlessness. After everything, the betrayal, the threats, the humiliations, she had won. Lisa leaned toward her and whispered, "We did it. And he's not just exposed, he's vulnerable." The judge concluded the hearing with a nod and a stern reminder for both parties to comply with post-trial reporting. Then he stood and left robe flowing behind him. As the room stirred to life, Arthur rose, muttering something to his attorney. He refused to look at Veronica. Simone followed him out like a shadow, no longer whispering instructions, no longer in control. Veronica remained seated a moment longer, soaking it all in. The cameras were already swarming outside, and she knew the questions would come. But this moment, this one right here, was hers. When she finally stood, Lisa and Laura embraced her tightly. "I feel like I can breathe again," Veronica whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Outside, the sky was still grey, but to her it looked brighter than it had in months. Reporters surged toward her, mics outstretched, but this time Veronica faced them without fear. She spoke clearly, calmly. "I'm grateful the court recognized the truth. This was never about vengeance, it was about justice, about refusing to be silenced." She didn't need to say more. Her poise, her strength, and the verdict said it all. That night, Veronica returned to her apartment, set down her keys, and looked out over the city lights. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. Not because she'd defeated Arthur, but because she'd reclaimed herself, her name, her story, her future. And this time, it belonged to her alone. Veronica's breath caught in her throat. She felt tears welling as relief, vindication, and overwhelming emotion washed over her. She turned to Lisa and Laura, embracing them, scarcely believing it was over. Arthur's face was a dark mask of fury. Simone stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Outside, reporters bombarded Veronica with questions, but for the first time she felt at peace facing their cameras. She spoke clearly. "I'm grateful to the court for recognizing the truth. This wasn't about revenge, it was about fairness and dignity." That evening, in the quiet of her apartment, Veronica allowed herself a moment to weep for the marriage she had lost, for the illusions that had shattered. Yet she also felt a new sense of freedom blossoming within her. A chapter of her life had closed, and though scarred, she emerged standing tall. In the end, Veronica Caldwell found more than just a legal victory. She reclaimed her voice, her identity, and her future. The court's ruling froze Arthur's elaborate web of secret holdings, forcing him to face the consequences of his betrayal. Though she lost friends and endured public scrutiny, Veronica discovered a newfound strength within herself. No longer defined by her husband's wealth or reputation, she stepped forward into a life shaped by her own choices. If this story captivated you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so you won't miss more true-to-life drama and inspiring tales of resilience. Every click you make helps us continue bringing you stories of triumph, heartbreak, and the unyielding power of the human spirit. Join our community, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned. More riveting narratives are just around the corner.